I just want to thank everybody for joining us for another one of our Beyond School Hours webinars. This has been a really great series this year, and we're super excited to have Sean with us again today. But before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background. My name is Elizabeth Seary. I'm the Executive Director of Communications and Development at Foundations, Inc. And Foundations, Inc. is a national education nonprofit. We're located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And our mission is to improve the quality of education by strengthening the skills of educators. So we work across the school day. We work in after-school programs with schools and districts and even at the state level. And our vision is really to create a brighter future for every child every day. If you're interested in learning more about Foundations, Inc., you can take a minute to follow us on social media or check out our website. That information will be in the chat for you. You might already know us from our signature professional development experience, the Beyond School Hours Conference. Beyond School Hours Conference is held every February. This will be our 26th year. This year in February, we will be in Orlando, Florida from February 9th through the 12th. And the registration is open. Please consider joining us. It's a great time. It's 3.5 days of professional development and networking opportunities. And also we have a lot of fun. We are really excited to have Sean Petty, the Senior Study Director at WestEt with us. Sean is one of our favorite presenters, and he is going to share the 4 steps to sustainable success. And he's going to give us an understanding of how each of these steps is going to have lasting benefits for our students and stakeholders. So thanks, Sean.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Paula, for welcoming me back and having me here. Just want to make sure you can hear me and see the screen. Everything good? Okay, I get a thumbs up. Perfect. I see some familiar faces here. Thank you for joining us. I see some of my colleagues from Texas, and I see some White Riley Peterson fellows on the line and some other folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As Elizabeth said, so excited to be back. I have the great pleasure of doing the Perspectives from the Field talk show at the Beyond School Hours Conference, and I'm so excited that we're back in Orlando again, and this time it's going to be a little different, right, Paula? It's going to be on International Drive at the Rosen Center. Yeah, okay, I see head shaking. That is, if you guys don't know that particular hotel location, it is right in the middle of Orlando. It's right next to great restaurants, real close to some great attractions. So it's going to be an amazing conference, and we already have some amazing stuff as we're preparing our talk show and have some really cool folks lined up for the talk show. So excited there. Just want to do a pulse check and make sure Paul's going to be my timekeeper today and make sure I don't go over. I have until 1 o'clock Central Time, which I think is 2 o'clock Eastern. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. So we want to make sure we honor the hour, but thank you all for being here. Today's topic is all about something that I don't know about you, but it's kind of on my mind, and that is sustainability. And when I think of sustainability, sometimes I think it's a buzzword, but a lot of times I feel like this. Have you ever had someone just tell you, sustain your program? And they're like, here's a lot of money. Congratulations, you get millions of dollars to start your program, or thousands of dollars, whatever it is, sustain your program. And to me, that is like sitting there staring at the Milky Way. I'm like, what do you mean sustain my program? How am I going to do that? Like, how am I, when I'm working 24 hours just to maintain the program and just get it up and running, get my staff, get everybody working, report out to the state or to my funders about attendance and all this other stuff, and now you're asking me to sustain. Sometimes I feel like it's a daunting task. Have you ever felt that way? Anybody? I see a couple of head shakes. You know, feel free to raise your hand or throw in the chat if you've ever felt that way. I sometimes think it's kind of like someone saying, you know, get out there and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, sustain, you know, and I'm just like, what do you mean? How? Well, today, okay, I see a couple of yeses. Thank you. Well, that is kind of our goal today. Is I'm not going to roll out tons of funding options for you to go after, because I'll tell you this, there are 1,000 ways to get money. And I know that's a lot of people look at me and they're like, you're absolutely crazy, Sean. What do you mean there's 1,000 ways to get money? as a hustler on the street, like from the time I was a little kid, like when I was 12 years old, you know, my parents were like, well, if you want to buy that Japanese sword that you really want, you got to get out and earn it. And I realized that I could only mow so many lawns in a weekend. I could mow maybe 2 or 3 lawns. But if I got 4 of my friends to mow lawns and I paid them and I took a portion of the payment for myself, I could like triple my income by getting other people to do that for me. And next thing you know, I had an entire network of lawn mowing people. We were mowing like 20 lawns every weekend. There is always a way to make money. But the challenge is, are we doing it in the right way? Are we accomplishing our goals? So today, my challenge to everyone on the line is I want to introduce you to 4 steps that have helped with the development of what I call effective sustainability efforts in maintaining or building long-term success. Money comes and goes, but our programs and the things that we do can sustain over time. And that's the core of sustainability, not the money. But money is a big aspect of that. So I want to focus on that. And I'm going to start with a common phrase. By the way, if you have questions or you have thoughts or you're just burning to say, I got to tell Sean this, or I got to say this to the world, you are able to unmute yourself and chat directly with us. You're also welcome to raise your hand, share feedback. And I'm really good about monitoring the chat room. But if I don't capture something in the chat room, I know that Paula or Elizabeth will make sure that I do. So they will chat. Plus, I have several of the colleagues that I work with. I see Lori and Francis, they're on camera there. They will also hold me accountable. I know them very well, and they're going to be like, you didn't answer that question, Sean. You need to answer it. So they're going to make sure I do that as well. But here's a phrase that you hear a lot. It's, why is sustainability planning so important? Why is it something that the Department of Ed is asking you to do from the very beginning if you're 21st century, or if you're a nonprofit and you're getting money? Why do you plan to sustain? And the answer is real simple. It's this. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's kind of a standard answer that we use in all planning, right? We're like, okay, yeah, that's kind of common sense. I would also say this. You can also do just the opposite, and that is you can over-plan, which will also allow you to fail. So if you don't plan at all, you're pretty much planning to fail. But if you over-plan, you're also going to fail. And what do I mean by over-plan? Have you ever sat down and had a committee meeting or a meeting with a team, and the next thing you know, you make a plan, and a week later you're revising that plan, and then a week later you're revising that plan, and every single time it seems like you're planning and you never actually get to implementation? You never actually do anything. This is called, our life. We tend to plan, and we're all excited because we have these plans, but we don't actually implement them. So while we need to plan, we also need to be conscientious of just doing it, just getting out there and taking one step at a time. So I have an activity I want you to do. This is an activity you can do in a group, you can do by yourself, you can throw it in the chat, but I want you to take just a moment to think about some organization out there that has sustained. Who do you know has sustained their initiative, their movement, their program, their thoughts over time? Think about it for a second. Maybe throw in the chat. Maybe feel free to come off mute if you like. For those folks who are on camera, I'm going to call on them. So lucky camera people. But I'm going to call on a colleague of mine, Ms. Lori Celli. And she's used to me calling on her, so I'm going to call on her right away. Lori, what's a program that you know of that has sustained over time? Like anybody you can think of, feel free to come off mute and let us know.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Lori.
Thanks for calling on me. So yes, actually, I do know a few programs, former 21st century programs around the state of Texas, who have been able to sustain their programs. Obviously, not with the 1.5 million that they were awarded or whatever that amount was, but we talk to grantees all the time about finding out really looking at your needs assessment and really finding out what is most needed, and then taking that one or two components and then figuring out what it will take in order to sustain those components of your program. We're not asking you to sustain this whole gigantic program where you serve 1,000 kids, but maybe you serve 100 kids, most in need in this particular area. So we have seen a lot of programs that have sustained in that manner, keeping components of the program going. And then during that time, also working towards finding additional funds to help build that and continue to build that.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. So in your work, now Lori works in Texas and works with after-school programs in Texas, but also works nationally on many programs. So what you've seen are, organizations that have really, kind of outlined their theory of action, their needs, their vision, their mission, and are willing to, scale up or down based on the way the funding streams or resources may go. They tend to sustain because they're living up to that mission. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that, Lori. Thank you for being brave enough to come off mute and share that.
Of course.
I'm going to call one other person, excuse me. But in the chat room, we're starting to get some really good answers too. YMCA has been an organization that's been around for over 100 years and has sustained boys and girls clubs. Churches have been around for a long time. Teen challenges. I love the Susan G. Komen for the Cure, and maybe if we have time, I'll share a story about the Susan G. Komen for a Cure and how they got their sponsor of YoPlay. An interesting story. Girl Scouts, Francis put down Girl Scouts. The Gates Foundation. Interesting thing about foundations, a lot of people think that they're just unlimited money, but usually foundations are started with a sum of money, and then it requires good investing and good fiscal resourcing for that foundation to survive over time to be able to continue funding people. So it's not like a lot of times people who create foundations don't continue funneling money into them. The foundation actually has to be sustainable. So Boy Scouts, YWCA, another great one, 4-H, thank you. ITEEA, Carolyn, I'm not familiar with that organization. International Teacher, I can guess, but maybe you could share with us a little bit. Feel free to either come off mute or put in chat kind of what that organization is.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, it's the International Technology and Engineering Education Association. And it's been around for a very, very, very long time. I have like maybe 28 years in education. Mm-hmm. And it's the organization that basically pretty much got me started in STEMS education.
Yeah.
They have curriculum, they have conferences, programs geared toward project-based learning, hands-on learning, and they're still in existence. And I am the director of Partners in Ministries After School 21st Century Community Learning Center.
Okay.
And I spent 28 years in education as a technology education teacher. And this organization is the initial organization that we have a state branch also, but this is the international branch, okay, which provided a lot of professional development and training over the years. So I have to give a shout out to the International Technology Education and Engineering Association. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the organization. Thank you for sharing a little bit about what they do. And I love how you tied it into our conversation, which is those characteristics that have allowed the organization to sustain. I really do appreciate you coming off mute and letting us know. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Victoria also says, the Salvation Army. So a lot of great organizations here. And I would say I've done this presentation, gosh, I don't even know. I've been doing this for years, definitely over 10 years. Don't want to date myself too much, but I'll just say 10 years, right? And as I do this, no matter where I do this at, a lot of times these common elements filter up, and that's where we get the 4 steps from. These are the common elements that I see, not just nationwide, but internationally, all over the place. Almost all organizations or initiatives, movements that have sustained have a very solid vision and mission. They also have really good fiscal awareness and accountability. I learned this as a young kid. If I don't manage my money effectively, I don't sustain whatever I'm looking at. Like if I just spend money, and I'm trying to teach my daughters this concept, but I think I'm good at doing it and sometimes not necessarily great at teaching my daughters to do it. But fiscal awareness and accountability is kind of another common element. Strategic direction, like do you have a strategy and are you going in a certain direction, is another common element. And then communication and support. I love how, Carolyn, I love how you supported the organization there. And it sounds like you're a big champion. So wherever you go, you're going to champion that organization. That's a key aspect of sustainability, is it communicated and supported. So while these are common elements, how does it actually get down into the nitty gritty? As a lot of people say, you know, okay, so a common element is vision and mission, but is that just a feel-good thing? I have a vision, I have a mission. What does that mean? Like, tell me the tangible, Sean. So here's the tangible part of that. And it is the very first step I'm going to challenge you to think about when it comes to sustainability. When people think about sustaining their program, or they think about keeping things over time, the first thing they always go to is the money. They totally have a Jerry Maguire moment where they're like, show me the money. Like, how much money is it going to cost for me to do this? How much money do I need? How much money do I need to go after? And I would tell you, and this is controversial, and my big boss is actually on the line, so she may talk to me later about this, but it's not the money. It's not about the money. Money can come and go. It first is based on determining action, and the questions you have to ask yourself are this: what do you want to sustain and why? So our particular field are youth programs or youth development programs, after school, informal learning. When we think about funding and we think about sustainability, we think about keeping our program going, I'm going to challenge you to really drill down to what do you want to sustain? And then ask yourself why. So Lori, Francis, Chandler, and Lisa, they're on the line here, and they can tell you, you know, when we ask people this question, we always get the answer of what people think we want to hear, right? We say something like, what do you want to sustain? And it never fails. We get a program that says homework help, tutoring, you know, worksheet, plaza. And we're like, what? Is that really what you want to sustain? And as we drill down, sometimes it is. Sometimes, as a parent who appreciates after school programs that help my two daughters do their homework, that's amazing. And as a parent, I appreciate that. And if that's what you want to sustain, that's amazing. But I'll tell you a story about a program we had in Texas. And I asked the site coordinator and the project director of the after school program, like, what do you want to sustain? And she told me homework help, tutoring. I'm like, okay, I love that. That's great. Is that really what you want to sustain? And she stepped back and she's like, you know, Sean, I can't totally lie to you. And I'm like, well, I appreciate that. I don't ask people to lie to me every day, you know? And she's like, I really want to sustain, I do want to sustain homework, but I want to sustain lacrosse. And I'm like, okay, why? Why lacrosse? What about lacrosse is it that you want to sustain? And she said, I want to sustain lacrosse because I have over 100 kids coming and they love playing lacrosse and they're really engaged. And I want to keep the lacrosse team going because I know if I do, I'll keep the kids off the streets between the time when they'll get in the most trouble. And I'm like, okay, well, sounds to me like you know what you want to sustain and why you want to sustain. How are you going to measure success? And she's like, well, that's simple. Either kids come or they don't. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, usually if kids are running away from your after school program versus running to your after school program, you got a problem. Like I would say no matter how much evaluation you do, if kids are running away from your program versus running to your program, you might want to look at changing your program up a little bit. But when it comes to lacrosse, I was like, if kids are coming, you're obviously doing something right. And if that's what you want to sustain, that is great. And she's like, well, what about homework help? I know that's what my administration wants me to sustain. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, there's a difference between what you want to sustain and what you need to sustain. Sometimes we need to sustain things because a funder or someone has told us. So someone may be willing to fund your program if you do homework help. So you need to do homework help. But your passion is going to be in what you want to sustain. So I would always challenge you, analyze what you want to sustain, analyze your why. And when you do that and you figure out how to measure success, you're ready to go to the next step of sustainability, which the common element that you're tapping into is fiscal awareness and accountability. But the sustainability step is this right here, and that is to conduct an actual gap analysis. So once you figure out your action, you know what you want to sustain, and you know why you want to sustain it, and you know a little bit about how you're going to measure success of whether it's being sustained or not. That's when you start to tell people, you start to dig into the show me the money piece. And you do that by conducting a gap analysis. Now, one thing about a gap analysis are we usually do it backwards. We usually figure out how much money we need, and then we determine what type of program we want to run. So we tell ourselves, we need $100,000, and with $100,000, I can run this type of program. I'm going to challenge you, and again, these are just, thoughts on sustainability. I'm going to challenge you to do it just the opposite. Figure out the program you want, and then figure out how much it's going to cost. So you may want the gold standard program, totally gold standard. So I'm going to call one of my colleagues on the line here, just a 1 to 2 minute answer, and that's Chandler Dixon. You're on the line. So I'm going to ask you to come off mute in just 1 second. But Chandler, if I was to tell you what's your gold standard of an after-school program, and you had 30 seconds to tell me what's the gold standard, what would it be?
Safety, engaging, exciting, students there, student choice, voice and choice. If the students are excited about what you're offering, if they have a voice in what you're providing, then, and they have accountability in what's offered, then they're going to be there every day to see what they want being offered on a daily basis.
Perfect. So let me ask you to get down to some tangibles really quick. Name a program or an activity that your gold standard program might have.
A STEM program, of course. I would say NASA STEM Challenge is an example that it has engaging curriculum. It's hands-on. It's centered around the engineering design process, which allows students to be able to think and grow, work together as a team, and there's tons of engagement. Perfect.
Well, thank you. These are not pre-planned. Chandler's just answering off the cuffs. So, thank you for doing that. But let me challenge everybody on the line. One thing you notice about Chandler's answers is she told you the gold standard, and she didn't mention money. She didn't say, my program would be $1 million program and it would be this. She said, my program would have student voice and choice. My gold standard program would be a STEM program. My gold standard program would be something that students really want to go to and have a voice in defining. So she started talking about the tangibles, the actual reality of the program versus the cost. Outline your program first, and then start putting a price tag to it. You start determining the fiscal needs of the program. So going back to Chandler's gold standard program, if she wants a STEM program that's based on NASA STEM Challenge, maybe she actually wants to build a mission control center in the cafeteria, and it have computer banks and and screens and be simulations of kids actually acting like they're mission control. Now that can get in the several thousands, $100,000 range, right? From a cost perspective. So now that we know what she wants, we need to determine the fiscal needs. How much is the labor to run that program going to cost? How much are the supplies going to cost? How much? And you start determining these fiscal needs without determining a reduction in programming. So you don't start saying, oh, I know I'm never going to be able to afford that, so I'm only going to run, we're going to have a cardboard box in the cafeteria. We're going to run around like we're flying in a cardboard box instead of mission control center. Like, you don't start changing the program. You first determine your fiscal needs. You outline everything. Your perfect program, what does it look like? And then once you do that, you start analyzing what resources are available. You're like, okay, here's my ideal program and here's what it costs. Let's say it costs $100,000 a year to create a mission control center in the cafeteria. And you start analyzing your resources. Well, I can get free space, and that free space is worth this amount of money. And I can get cardboard from my local grocery store down the way, or Walmart, or whomever. I can get cardboard, and we can paint that cardboard and it can look like this. I can get teachers to volunteer. I can get some AmeriCorps. I can get this. You start identifying your existing resources that are there. And when you're analyzing your existing resources, you got to think about everything. You got to think about everything, and you got to put a monetary value to it. Why do you put a monetary value? It's not about money. All the dollar sign is, all money is a representation of resource allocation. Like, whether it's a ruble, or it's a franc, or it's a yen, or it's any form of currency out there, all that is a representation of what the resource is. So as you translate resource into dollar values, which is what we use in the United States, or cryptocurrency, whatever you use, right? As you start to figure out that, you're identifying your resources, and you're going to find that there are gaps. Your ideal program may cost, let's just say that Chandler has an amazing gold standard and it's $1 million, Her program to run that mission control center is $1 million, but Chandler can only get $100,000 of resources. So she has a $900,000 gap. That's where step 2 ends, and you go to step 3. You don't start solving that problem yet until you figure out step 2, which is to figure out those gaps. Now, sometimes you may find that your program only costs $100,000, but you have $1 million in the bank. So you have a $900,000 surplus. I know it's rare, and not often do we have surpluses, but I'm going to challenge you. If you have a surplus, consider your surplus as you would a gap, because you have to ask yourself some questions with the gap, and you have to ask yourself some questions with a surplus. Some people ask me why. Well, sometimes a surplus can be like finding a $20 bill in your jean pockets after you dry them in the dryer. Has that ever happened to you? You dry your clothes in the dryer, you pull them out. This happens with my daughter's clothes. Like, she'll leave her clothes in the dryer, and I love searching through her pockets because there's usually like money in pockets, and we have a rule: if we find money, it's ours. So, I can get at least $20 whenever my daughter does laundry, right? But that is a surplus. If I build that $20, it's not like every time I go to the dryer, I'm going to get $20. So that's not part of my budget. So surplus gaps or surpluses have to be accounted for as well. You have to ask yourself, is that surplus guaranteed, or is it just a one-time thing? ARP money, the America Rescue Plan money, is stimulus money. You can count it as surplus money. It is not sustainable, meaning that in 2024, that money is going to go away, and we're going to have to find out how to sustain it afterwards if we want to sustain those programs. So something to consider. There are a couple of things around step 2 that we also need to count into need to address. As you're determining your fiscal need, you need to determine exact costs. And those exact costs can be startup costs, maintenance cost, or infrastructure costs. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about an after-school program. We actually have startup costs quite a bit throughout the year. We have a startup cost when the program starts from summer. So if you think about it, most programs, most after-school youth programs take some type of summer break. Now, if your program is a year-round program and you never close your doors, you're open all the time, you may never have a new startup cost. Your startup cost is literally when you open your doors. But for programs that take like a 1 month break, like they take the month of July off and they come back in August. When you come back in August, you're going to have a startup cost. Think of this. Have you ever gone into December and had holiday break just to find out when you open back up in January that 2 staff members have resigned or put in their notice or haven't come back? Or have you ever found out that a facility space is not available when you come back from break? You go on spring break and all of a sudden the cafeteria is no longer available. The principal's like, you can't use it. You have to use the concrete pad outside. And you're like, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm not going to put kids on a concrete pad. They're 5 years old, you know? And the principal's like, sorry, I need the cafeteria. These are what you account for in startup cost. You have to realize that every time you start the program back up, there's going to be a ramp up to getting that program up and running. You're going to have staff changeover. You're going to have staff training. Have you ever started a program after a break just to find out kids aren't coming anymore? Like you go to spring break and all of a sudden kids like disappear. Kids who have attended your program all year don't come back. And you're like, what's going on? You may have a recruiting cost. I always tell people I ran secondary programs a lot. And after every holiday, I had to do recruiting. Because like after Labor Day, the high school kids would not come back to programming. And I'm like, what's going on? You know, and it wasn't that they didn't enjoy programming. It's just that, you know, they got caught up in something else. So you have startup costs. Maintenance cost. We hear a lot about inflation right now. Inflation's running at about 8%. But a lot of times our fiscal funders don't count inflation in their funding. So for example, you may get a 21st century, which is what I'm most familiar with. You may get a 21st century award from the state, but the state doesn't come back at the end of the year and say, well, inflation this year is 8%. So I'm going to give you an 8% increase in your grant. Wouldn't that be nice if they did? You're like, oh, here's some extra money. But a lot of times your funder doesn't do that. They don't account for inflation and increase your money or your award. But your staff do. Your staff is like the cost of living thrown up by 8%. I kind of need a pay raise, right? These are maintenance costs. We have to think about in year 1 of the grant or in year 1 of funding, we have a certain salary level. But in year 2, our labor costs are going to be more because inflation's gone up. And in order to keep people, we have to increase people's salary to keep up with the cost of living. And as Susie's saying, during COVID, the first closure, funding's jeopardized because attendance is so low. You know, and yeah, comical because pandemic, like a lot of people, I used to work for the Walt Disney company, and Disney shut down the theme parks. And unfortunately, if no one's going to theme parks, no one's paying for a ticket, no one's paying for people's salary, Disney laid off thousands and thousands of employees. Like 72,000 in Orlando alone were laid off because they just couldn't keep. Disney did it as long as they could. Hopefully we'll never be in that situation again, knock on wood, right? But we have to account for maintenance costs. We have to account for inflation, but we also have to take into effect that our funding stream may not increase. So what are we going to do? There's a gap there. And then you also have to think about infrastructure cost. In the situation with the cafeteria, you may have an agreement with the campus to use their facilities for free. But at the end of the year, the campus may change its mind. and may decide that you no longer get that facility for free. You have to go somewhere else. So now you have to contemplate, how am I going to pay for infrastructure? How am I going to pay for additional items? Last but not least, you have to think, when you think about your funding stream, you think about your fiscal need, think about timeline and level of effort. And there once was an organization called the Finance Project. The Finance Project was kind of a organization that was dedicated to after school and helped us really think through our funding and how we can sustain. Unfortunately, and I find this ironic, they sunset. So they themselves closed their program, but those of us that were trained in their methodology continue to teach about sustainability. And this was a document the Finance Project created to help with that level of effort and that timeline. So when you first get your funding award, whether it be, a government grant, it be a foundation giving you money to start up, or it be local donors having you start a church-based program, whatever it may be, you start with your first year, right? And you're like, okay, we're going to have 60 students, and at our ratio of, let's say, 27 per student, or 27 students per teacher, maybe, we can do 2.5 staff. We need 18 computers because we're going to do some computer learning with them. And we really want to create a family engagement program. And we know that our funder wants us to track data for evaluation. So we're going to build a data system. So that's what you do in your first year. But then as you're looking at the second year, your aspirations are you want to grow up to 100 students. But if you add 40 more students to your mix, you know that you need 3 staff. You have to add another staff member. You know that you need maybe 6 more computers to be able to serve those students. You're going to continue your family engagement. You're not really going to do a whole lot there, just grow it a little bit. And you're going to keep developing data. And then when you hit your 3-year, your aspiration is to go all the way up to 140 students. And this time you want 4 full-time staff, 30 computers. You've decided that for support services, you're going to add a health element. Maybe you're going to open up a clinic, kind of like the Harlem Children's Zone. You're going to open up a clinic for people in your area, and you're going to keep your data going on. This is an example of how you can plan level of effort over the 3 years. And this will attribute directly to your finance. The first year you need 2.5 staff. But by year 3, you need 4 staff, so you have to count for that. What are your fiscal resources for each year? What are your gaps? What are your surpluses? And then once you do that, that's step 2. Step 1 was determine your action, figure out what you want to sustain. Step 2 is to figure out all your fiscal needs. Step 3 is where you actually start digging down into forming strategy. I skipped a part. I apologize. I got ahead of myself. I also forgot to identify resources. Think about when you're identifying resources, think about, are they cash or in kind? Do people give you money, or do they give you something like money? Realize that in kind resources are just as valuable as cash. If you get a person who volunteers for your program 20 hours a week, that is like having that's like having a person on staff for 20 hours. I'm going to throw this out here, and this may be, again, like I said, my big boss is on the line, so she may laugh at me later, but I'm going to ask, how many people on the line today only work 40 hours a week? That can be rhetorical. You don't have to raise your hand or anything, but think about it. How many people on the line only work 40 hours a week? My next question is also rhetorical, and that is, how many of your organizations put in your job description that you were going to work 40 hours a week? As a few people are raising their hands. Okay. Very few job. First of all, I don't know that it's exactly legal to say, we're going to hire you for this amount of money, and oh, by the way, we're going to work you 60 hours a week. Congratulations, right? I don't know that anybody puts that out there. But in reality, while we sign our contracts or we sign our work agreements for 40 hours a week, many of us work 60 hours or more a week. And why do we do it? Because we're passionate about kids. We love kids. We love what we do. We love our programs. We love our staff. We love our team. So we work all the hours we need to work to make things happen. But I'm going to tell you this. Every hour over 40 that you work is an in-kind donation to your organization. And I'll repeat that, and this is being recorded, so maybe I'll be held accountable to it, I don't know. But every hour you work over 40 hours is an in-kind donation to your program. What do I mean by that? I mean, I'm looking at Francis there on the line. And so I know for a fact, mainly because Francis actually works for me, I know for a fact that Francis works, more than 40 hours a week. If Francis were to quit today, heaven forbid, don't even think about it, Francis, but if Francis were to quit today, I would be hard pressed to find somebody to replace Francis, because I can't necessarily publish out there, I need a go-getter who works 60 hours a week, who's going to run 5 programs and keep me sane. I can't publish that as a job description. But that's what Francis does. So if Francis were to quit, not only would I have to contemplate her salary, I would also have to contemplate everything that she does outside of what we pay her. These are things you got to think about. If you were to quit, let's say you win the lottery and you've decided to go open up after-school programs in Jamaica, right? I think that's a great vision, by the way. And let me know, I may come work for you. But you're going to open up after-school programs in Jamaica or Hawaii or your favorite island, Tahiti, wherever it is. And you were to quit your program tomorrow, would your Chandler say in Hawaii or the Virgin Islands? Okay. How would your program replace you? What knowledge would be lost if you're gone? If you've been doing this job for 20 years or 10 years, what's the legacy that you're leaving if you were to move? Is that replaceable? You have to consider these things. Some other things you have to think about. How long is your resources good for? How long are they good for? America Rescue Plan money has been amazing. It's been the single most investment in after-school funding since the beginning of 21st century. But what's going to happen in 2024 when it's over? It's just like Race to the Top was one of the single most investments in education at that time. But when Race to the Top money ran out, many states were scrambling to figure out how they're going to keep those initiatives going. So you have to think about the time frame these funds are available. If you get a 21st century grant, how long is that grant good for? And what are you going to do when it's over? And then you have to think about where your funding sources come from. Are they public or private? Why is that a factor? Well, if they're public, they have to be discharged to the general public. People have to know how you spend them. There are usually some type of rules, usually built up in the laws, that you're held accountable for. For example, in 21st century, which is one of our funding streams based on ESSA funding, you can't pay for food except in parent engagement activities, but you can't pay for food outside of a nutritional snack. So I've had programs ask me, well, why can't I go buy McDonald's for everybody? Because that's an unallowable cost. But if you get $2,000 from a local angel funder and they just give you $2,000 off the street, that's private money. And as long as there's no strings attached to that private money, you can use that money to go buy McDonald's, as long as you have an accounting principle that says how you're spending it, that's allowable. Private versus public is something you need to think about, but many times there's private funding that they put strings onto it. So you may get a private funder who says, I'll fund it, but only if you do a lacrosse program. Well, because they're funding a lacrosse program, you got to do a lacrosse program. So you got to think about that. I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, I would tell you a story about the Komen Foundation and the breast cancer awareness. As many people know, Komen is has a sponsorship with YoPlay, and they do the YoPlay yogurt lids. If you turn a lid in, they give a certain portion of that yogurt to the Komen Foundation for breast cancer awareness. When Komen was first deciding on trying to find funding for their initiative, they put an RFP out there. I think this is real clever. They put an RFP out there and they said, who wants to fund us? We're so cool. Who wants to fund us? Wouldn't that be awesome? Your after school program is so amazing that you have to vet vendors. You have to vet funders to find out if they have the honor of funding you. Like, wouldn't that be an amazing situation to be in? You're like, you have the honor of funding my program. But that's what Komen did. And it boiled down to two groups. One was Yoplait yogurt, and the other was Hooters, the restaurant. And Hooters, the restaurant organization, said, we would love to fund this because that kind of matches with our restaurant. And so the Komen Foundation had to really think about, what type of funding do they want to go after and what aligns with their vision? And they chose Yoplait, although they expressed gratitude to Hooters for being willing to sponsor them. Interesting foundational story if you ever want to read about it. Once you do all this, you start thinking about your strategic direction. And that is where you get into strategy. This is the show me the money moment. This is when you take everything, all the work that you've done, and you start looking at how you're going to fund or resource your program. And there are two things you can do: explore cost savings and generate new revenue. So a lot of people will tell me, no, there's like 6 or 10 different strategies. I'm going to tell you they all boil down into two. When you're looking at funding, you either have cost savings or you generate new revenue. So when you're looking at cost savings, you're looking at this. Number one, can you replace existing initiatives? Have you really made your organization as efficient as possible? We had an after-school program in Texas, where I live, who really wanted to start a teenage pregnancy awareness center. And they did the first step. They determined what they wanted to sustain with it, what they wanted to build. They determined the resources they had. And now they're starting to form their strategy to fill their gaps. And when we were working with them, we said, well, we understand you want to build a teenage pregnancy awareness center, but you have one just down the street. There's one already sponsored by an organization. Why are you trying to recreate the wheel? Why don't you partner and allow that location to provide the service for you? And it was like a light went off. They were like, well, we didn't think we could do that. Well, why not? Why not replace one initiative with another initiative to save money, not supplant, not fund somebody's salary with another funding strategy, but replace an existing initiative. If you have a tutoring program in your after-school program is coming to a close, and your school district has a Title I tutoring program, why can you not replace your after-school tutoring with the Title I tutoring and let it be one? Can you replace initiatives? Now, again, you have to think about the rules, requirements, and the different guidelines attached to it, but that's something you can do. Replace an initiative. Number two, can you scale back the initiative until your gap is missing? So for example, this is the hardest one for youth professionals who are not accountants to understand. We want to serve everybody, no matter what. And we will give the clothes off our backs to help kids. And that is admirable. But there is what we call thresholds of funding. So for example, if you have a 1 to 15 ratio, that's your ratio, one teacher or one instructor per 15 kids, and you have 20 kids, you're not operating at maximized funding. Because if you have 20 kids attending the program and you have 2 staff members, that's 1 to 10. You really, either need to go to 30 kids so that you have 2 teachers for 30 kids. That's maximizing your threshold. or you need to cut the program back to 15 kids and have one instructor. And this is where usually people get upset and walk out of the room. So I'm looking at participants, see if anybody's leaving yet. That's hard for youth professionals to do. But when you're looking at your cost, you have to make, you as a leader of an after-school program, have to make the tough decisions on where you allocate resources. You may choose to not eliminate that gap, but when you're looking at cost-saving options, sometimes you have to scale things back until that gap is eliminated, with the understanding that you're going to grow it later when you have a surplus or a consistent surplus. Another strategy for cost saving is find efficiency savings. And let me throw this tagline out here for all the administrators out there. Our number one expense in after school is labor. And I would propose your number one expense in almost any business is labor. Like having actual people that you pay to do a service. That is your number one expense. In after school, it's usually about 70% of your expense. So when we say find efficiency, the first thing people do are like, who do I have the most of and where can I save the most money? I'm going to eliminate core staff. A lot of times in districts and schools and education, those are teachers. Teachers make up the bulk of your staff. So the easiest way to save money is to eliminate teacher positions. And then we ask that person who's working 40 hours a week to work 60, and we do it kind of randomly. I would propose there are other efficiencies that you can look at. Now, this also doesn't mean going after the highest paid. I made the mistake once of working with a state, and I was working with their state board of education, and we were going through this, and I said, well, some efficiencies are you could look at your administrator pay. You have several members of the state board that are paid at quite high salary ranges. You could eliminate one board position and hire 4 teachers for that salary. I have never been invited back to that state to train again. But what I was trying to get across is you have to analyze everything for efficiencies. Sometimes you can find efficiencies by simply changing the way you do something. I mentioned that I worked for the Walt Disney Company for a while. I ran hotels. And we discovered that there's this growing environmental movement for people. A lot of people want to save the environment. Well, we were changing sheets and washing towels and changing all the linens out of someone's room every single day. We discovered if we put a little placard in the room and said, if you hang your towel up on a bar to dry and you reuse your towels, you're saving the environment. That was true. You are saving the environment. But the cost savings to the Disney company was in the millions because we were not doing laundry every single day. So it was a win-win. We found efficiencies by tapping into something people were willing to do and yet saved us money by not doing it. So we found an efficiency savings. The second place is to think about revenue. How do you generate revenue? There are 4 sources of standard revenue. There's local revenue. If you're an after-school program or youth development program, are you tapping into everything locally? Is your city, your county, your local entity, do they have a stake in the game? Are they funding anything in your after-school program? If they're not, I challenge you as an after-school leader to start reaching out to those local officials saying, hey, our funding is ending. We have a gap. We need this to keep this program going. Tap in local. Your state. Does your state have a funding stream for what you're doing? Are they allocating resources to what you're doing? Or do they have funding streams that you can tap into? Do you have the opportunity to look at what's called flow through? Flow through money is money that is allocated into an agency and flows through that agency into the local area. The most common one is military bases. A military base in a local area is required to invest a portion of governmental money into the local area to support social initiatives such as schools. Are you tapping into that flow through money? And the last is federal. Are you maximizing every possible federal funding stream that you can? Once you do all this, you can start looking at your public sources, your private sources. Foundations will typically fund a program for 3 to 4 years. After about 4 years, most foundations do what we call sunset. They move on to another initiative. Very few foundations, there are some out there, the Wallace Foundation is one of them, the Mott Foundation is another. They tend to fund initiatives over time, but most foundations will support something for a period of time and then they move on to a new initiative after 3 to 4 years. But they're a source of private money. But do you know the #1 funding stream for any program out there, any youth development or social program out there? It's not public sources, it's not foundations, it's actually individual donations. President Barack Obama was a strategic genius when it came to this. He was the very first public campaign official to tap into what we call small time donors. Everybody before President Obama would tap into big donors. They would say $1,000, $2,000, $10,000. That's what they would ask you for. But President Obama put out text messages that said, donate $5 today. And then a week later, donate 5 more. And a month later, donate 5 more. And by doing little donations like that, his campaign amassed a larger campaign fund, larger than any other presidential candidate had ever seen up to that point. All by doing local donations. Same strategy that churches have used for a very long time. Local donations are the #1 private source of funding. Another source to think about is fee for service. Lisa, I think it was you. I see Lisa Underwood on the line. I think it was you that told me you had a wedding once at a facility of yours. Is that correct?
Yes, they had a wedding at the high school. We've actually had 2. They had a wedding at the high school on the stage, and there was a wedding at the intermediate school in the cafeteria with the little stage there. So yes.
Yeah, now I'm not saying everybody farm out your programs as like hotels or Airbnb, you know. I'm not saying that, but I am saying look at opportunities. One of the greatest ways to do this is, I think of the story of McDonald's, and I have 4 minutes. I promise to wrap up in 4 minutes. McDonald's used to only operate lunch and dinner when they first opened, but then they realized they could do breakfast. And then they realized we have to keep the lights on all night long, 24 hours. What if we kept 1 person working or 2 people for safety working in the McDonald's and we actually served a limited menu all night long? Would people like Sean Petty, who works till 3 in the morning, come by McDonald's and go get a burger? Absolutely. I am starving at 1 in the morning, you know? So McDonald's found that by using that extra time, they could accrue additional resources. How can you do this in your after school program? Maybe you're a YMCA and you have a gym that can be used during non-program hours to rent out to other organizations. Maybe you're a school that could do something. You could do fee for service. Now, I am not advocating child labor or anything of that nature, but I'm saying you could be creative. And then there are unrelated revenue streams that you can tap into. A school district that I worked with started advertising for the local pizza joint on the side of their buses. It was something that took a lot of planning and they were very careful about it, but it was something they did. Step 4 is when you start communicating your plan, and this is the do it section. Document your plan, build a system of support, and establish a continuous improvement. That, in a nutshell, are the 4 steps. Determine your action, conduct your gap analysis, form your strategy, and then do an executive plan. This is the 4 steps of sustainability in roughly an hour for you. So my objective was to introduce you to 4 steps that hopefully will help you sustain. You're going to leave this webinar being like, there's so much more I want. And that's fine, because that opens you up to what you can do now and what you can do later. In the slide deck that I put at the beginning of the chat, I put this slide deck that has these links in here. I would ask you to follow these steps and hopefully sustain your program. So with that, I turn it over to Elizabeth. I thank you for your time, and I apologize that it was so quick, but hopefully this got you inspired to really dig into sustainability so we can keep your amazing programs going forever. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Sean. This was such a great, informative webinar, and I think people really will leave with some real actionable takeaways that they can use immediately. And that's really the goal of these webinars. We thank you all so much for your time. I'm just going to remind everyone, because of the holiday weekend, we aren't going to be having a webinar next week, but please check out our webinar series. We are doing webinars until the new year on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern time. It is free professional development. Tell your friends. We always have the most amazing presenters like Sean. So again, we appreciate your time. Please take a minute to fill out our feedback survey. We appreciate your thoughts, and we want to know the things that you are looking for when it comes to this webinar series. And if you would like to know more, learn more, meet with us at the Beyond School Hours Conference. We'll be there in February from the 9th through the 12th in Orlando, Florida. Again, it's a great time. It's also a way to spend 3.5 days like really recharging and getting the tools and resources you need to take back to your programs. So thank you again, everyone. Please join us for another one of our webinar series, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.